So what does board of directors mean in today's term, and why do we need it?
Well, if I may start with really where I am currently at with ICDM, really as the National Institute of Director, we are mandated to professionalize directorship. And I think besides educating boards, we are also responsible for building that next pipeline of board talent. So really what essentially is a board of director? It is really there to ensure that they are acting in the best interest of the company, representing not just the shareholder, but a wider stakeholder system, monitoring the performance of management to ensure that the company is delivering the results, but also ensuring that there are sufficient internal controls to oversee the operations of the company. So I think what a lot of people think is that the general role of a board of director is to oversee the operations of the company. But I think what is really important now is the modern day director has really moved on to needing to know the insights of the company, but as well as foresight. So you'll hear the term future ready directors. And so this is really the expanding scope of board of directors. And in the 7 years that I've been with ICDM, I've seen, the scope of education, the spectrum of what a director has to cover, from the traditional fundamental board duties of risk, financial strategy. Now it encompasses things like sustainability, digital, and even human capital. So you could see the expansion of the scope that a modern director has to look after now.
Right. So who can be a board member? What does it take to be a board member? Now I'm looking at about, say, two categories of stakeholders for that matter, right? Let's look at a senior C-suite person who aspires to be a board. That's one. Number two, I'm a student. I'm doing my undergrad studies. But in my textbooks, I always come across this board of directors, which kind of inspires me to be one someday. So what do I need to do? So there are two categories of people here.
Yes, and as I said about building the pipeline, I think when we set out building the framework of ICDM's director education pathway, we were very conscious that we are not only there to nurture the existing directors, but we are also responsible to build board-ready candidates from what we call a segment of executives called board-ready directors. So maybe let's tackle the first part of the C-suites that we spoke about. And increasingly, what we've seen is, I'm so proud that we already have about 1,500 candidates in what we call our ICM Directors Registry. 10% of them are actually deemed as board ready. And these are really C-suites that you have spoken about, who have really spent time, invest time to educate themselves to make sure that they have taken the programs and also taken that pathway to becoming board ready. Now, what does it mean for a C-suite if I want to become a director? What's the pathway that I have to take? So to become a director in this country, I think besides the law that states the minimum requirements, the effectiveness is also a test of looking at maybe 5 segments of whether you fulfill this effectiveness. Firstly, whether you have independence and an integrity mindset. Secondly, whether you have the relevant skill sets for the sectors and industry that you want to go to. And you've got to have strategic thinking and sound judgment, because let's not forget, the directors are meant to be able to oversee the company, not execute, which is much to the management's expertise to carry out. And then, of course, you need to have the time commitment to be able to dedicate your time to the company, to be able to understand the responsibility. And of course, lastly is a commitment to fiduciary duties, because it is a legal responsibility. So before you even look at fulfilling the minimum criteria to becoming a board director, I think it's important that C-suites understand that these are 5 areas that they need to fulfill before they become board ready. And next, of course, it comes to exposure on when you potentially, how do you really get onto the pathway? That's what a lot of conversations we have. So we always tell aspiring directors that it's not just about technical competence, but you also need to be able to have that visibility and network to position yourself to potential boards who may want to recruit you. So there's an element of developing yourself technically, but there's also an element of making sure that you are visible to the boards who would ultimately recruit you in that sense. Now, let's move on to the students part. I know it's a very far pathway to move on to, but when we're in the business of building pipelines, we also have to look at the students that are coming up. And increasingly, we've spoken to a lot of universities who are starting to embed governance education within degree programs, as well as master's program, and of course, executive education. So I think that really is the fundamental side. So if you are a student and wanting to look out to eventually becoming a board member, I think you need to at least ensure that you've got, the basic governance education at the onset before you then proceed to employment, C-suite, and ultimately to the pathway. And already we are seeing younger and younger aspiring directors getting board seats because of the skill sets they carry. Because in today's world, in many other companies, skill sets like digital, AI, and so forth are really what boards are currently looking out for.
Right. You mentioned about building a network as you are board ready.
Correct.
So if I'm a C-suite, what kind of network that I should have?
Right. No, that's a very good question because we get that asked a lot. And I think when you're C-suite, you're obviously some of them come to us and say that they already have a lot of exposure. They report to the board, they attend board meetings, they attend board committee meetings, which is one important element of that. But I think the other part is really about getting into that network amongst directors as well. And so with the establishment of ICDM and a lot of the advocacy dialogues and events we've done, increasingly we see a combination of existing directors coming to our advocacy dialogues, but also C-suites like yourself who are aspiring to be directors coming to have that conversation. And when you have that community where you have existing boards exchanging insights with aspiring board members, it also helps the aspiring directors hear what it feels like to become a board director, what they need to do, what they need to upskill, and what potentially to expect when they ultimately reach that position. So when I speak a little bit about visibility, it's really about making sure that you attend the right kind of programs, the right kind of networks. So, I mean, not just us, but I think increasingly, a lot of leadership programs, a lot of other development programs increasingly have got this mix of attendees where you are able to network and rub shoulders with board directors. And that gives you that insights of really what to expect and what you need to upskill. So, for example, we've got members who are C-suites who are aspiring to become a director. Once they attend a program on sustainability, for example, they understand what they need to do to upskill in order to fulfill future requirements in case they do want to get on a board eventually.
You mentioned earlier about when you were explaining the meaning of board of directors, you highlighted that explicitly saying this is about governance. It's not about management of the company. Where do they draw the line? How do they know this is the line that they need to watch out for?
We always get that question a lot. And actually, it's one of the most difficult and challenging transition. In some of the boards we work with, there are maybe increasing demand for former CEOs to come on the board because of the experience that they've had. But that also brings another set of challenges because when you have a former CEO coming on board, sometimes it can be quite challenging not to be the CEO when you're on the board. I think the conversations that we have a lot is how do you transition? So you first have to understand what is the transition. So you are moving from a management perspective to an oversight position. You are moving from reporting to monitoring. And so you're moving from execution to strategic direction. So as long as you understand where and have clarity of that role, then you will be able to understand that transition. But one of the most glaring challenge and sort of issues that comes up when a former executive sits on the board, and that's quite common when we evaluate boards we see, is the line of questioning. And so when you're a board member, you don't ask questions like, why did you not do this? But it's more of asking, have we thought about it in this aspect or another area, or maybe we think about it as another angle? So I think really it's when you are someone sitting on the board, it's really how you question and your mindset and how you think, and that you are no longer executing, but you are overseeing. But I'm mindful that in some situations, in a crisis, for example, the board may have to step in to be a little bit more, not micromanaging, but a little bit more involved. In a crisis situation where everything needs to move very fast, decisions need to be, there are situations when the board has to step in, maybe to make some instructions and so forth. So it really depends on the maturity and the phase of the company where it's at.
I came across this article I was reading while doing some research on this topic. We started this whole board of directors thing because they wanted to play an advisory role to the CEO initially. Then evolved into something more deeper than that after Sarbanes-Oxley Act was introduced in 2002 because of the cases that happened right before that. As we know, it's a global issue and stuff like that. So then the evolution of board kind of went into a mode where there's more expectation from the management to deliver outcomes because of the requests of the shareholders, etc. So the board has to play a more important role. So today they are involved in strategic planning, as in the boards. Yes. Strategic planning. They're involved in digital transformation, sustainability, etc. Now, to get into a management view or getting into an executive role, it's a bit tough because you are already expected to do something just on the border of this, right?
Yes.
So how do we, as now coming from a management side, right? So from a management side, what do we do if they cross the line, and how does that impact the board directorship?
Yeah, and I myself is on the management line as well, and I understand. And in one part of the work we do, I sit in board evaluations, and this is often something that we hear very much so, and which is why I empathize in the sense that I think there are phases where boards may be more involved than others. But I think what's really important is, if you were a management and at times you feel, how do you draw the line? How do you actually even articulate that to your board? Really, I've seen that good companies do a regular board evaluation. Yeah. And this is when the board can evaluate themselves and with their peers. But this is also a time where management can give feedback to the board on how effective they think the board is. It's a 360 feedback, which we encourage. Not enough companies do them independently. Companies in Malaysia are running that internally, but we always believe that when it's independently run, then people are more candid, especially management is able to voice their views in a more anonymous way and dealing with that particular subject matter. So we've seen cases where management feels that board has encroached into their area. We've also seen cases where board feels that management is not giving enough in terms of their presentation of materials. Now, one point I like to make is that I think very often in many of the conversations we had, board may tend to micromanage depending on the papers you put up. So if management puts up a paper which is very operational, it touches a lot on operational matters, then that conversation will automatically allude to that. But if management wants strategic guidance from board, then they can start off by having papers that outlines very clearly what they would like the board to help oversee. But if everything else fails, then yes, evaluation will be one way of providing feedback to the board. And the other side of it is also to ensure that boards constantly go for development courses. We cover a lot of these programs. We cover a lot of board management programs where even up until today is as popular as it was when we started 7 years ago, because this conversation about drawing that clear line between board and management is always ongoing for any company.
Right. So what is the right size of a board membership for a company? I'm very sure it will depend on the size of the company and the depth of the businesses, etc. But on average, what's the number like?
Well, I've seen IPO-ready companies come up to around about 6 to 8 members. There are companies that come up to about 10. There are up to 12. But an optimum size will be between 8 to 10. But I'm also mindful that in many of the listed companies, there are also compositions of sometimes the MD, the independent non-executive directors, but also the non-executive directors, which represents major shareholders. So depending on how many representation you need, but optimally, I think about 8 to 10 will be the right size.
Like companies that are in the growth stage, right? So when they start a startup company, then they grow, become IPOs or listed, etc. How do they know I need to get the right composition of board members so that will help them in their journey for the next X number of years? Who does the judgment on this?
That's a great question, and really something that's very dear to my heart, because we've been working a lot with IPO-ready companies to work out what exactly is the composition. In fact, recently we worked with a partner to help these IPO-ready companies formulate what would be the right composition for them. And as a best practice, we recommend that companies look at what you call a board composition matrix. So it essentially lays out what are your essential skill sets you need for the company. Now, for every company, you probably need a legal person and finance person, which is most critical. And then, of course, subject matter expertise, depending on your industry. And then comes the value add ones. Maybe it could be digital, it could be sustainability, it could be human capital if you are very people heavy. So when you look at your essentials, you essentially mark what are the key skill sets you need and what are the value add and nice to have composition. And once you've mapped that out, then you kind of mapped it a little bit to the demographics consideration as well when it comes to age, gender, and so forth. So I think really the fundamental thing companies like the startup would need is the chance to develop that composition skill set so they understand, because they themselves will carry some skill sets. But many of the companies I've met would actually value finance people being on board. And actually, increasingly, as I'm having more and more conversations with these companies, I think that it is more essential that they actually have good independent directors on board who can guide them along the journey so that they're not only prepared for the pre-IPO phase, but also the post-IPO phase and after they launched. Because I think the performance and the compliance and the requirements are also equally as essential after. So it's not a break after once you hit the gong, but I think there's work to be done after that as well.
There's a lot of perception or expectation that if one becomes a board member, it's a very glamorous role.
Yes.
Is it really?
This is a little bit of a misconception of board directorship. Maybe a bit better now, but I think essentially some people still think it's a honorary or symbolic role, right? It's a title to a lot of people, but we are always mindful. We always remind everybody who wants to embark on the directorship journey that it comes with legal duties, fiduciary responsibilities, and even reputational expectations. So in that sense, I think it's not... The other misconception that people have is also the fact that it's a once a quarter meeting sort of role where you attend meetings. But in reality, the amount of time that you have to spend in between those meetings, preparing, managing stakeholders, understanding the business, and also keeping yourself updated is not as simple as it is. So hopefully that misconception is slowly moving away. But I think there's still a lot of work that we have to do to generate that awareness.
Yeah, and one of the things that I realized from reading some articles, etc., it's perceived that as if it's a post-retirement role, like an ordinary role. But there are also board members who are already working in a different organization, being a board member. Now, these two categories of people have different time and space luxuries, right? How does the one that's working today in an organization, becoming a board member, manage time? I'm sure you get these questions a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
I think if you remember, much earlier in the conversation, we spoke about the effectiveness. So you have the compliance or the minimum requirements to be a director, and then you have the character part, right? So both are equally as important. And one of the key elements is really having enough time to dedicate to the company. And that's really what potential directors need to assess, whether they have that time to do that or not. Now, we're increasingly seeing a lot of executives sitting on boards, and this is really a company policy thing. And so internally, if the company allows for current executives to sit on boards, it's really because they want to encourage career growth for that particular candidate, for example. And I think it is really the responsibility of that executive sitting on other boards to ensure that he or she has sufficient time to dedicate to the company. Like I mentioned, there are a lot of things in between attending the meetings. And in some companies like banks would have board meetings once a month, not once a quarter. And then you have board committee over and above that. And this is why we come out to guide directors. And a lot of education actually emphasizes on the role of directors. What is your governance role? What do you need to oversee? And to make sure that they understand the responsibility, and to make sure they understand and ask themselves that question, do I have enough time to commit to this company? And so I think one of the things we also get asked is, what really differentiates an effective director with a normal director, right? So I think rather than saying what it is, I think the candidate themselves have to ask, am I able to act in the best interest of the company, not just representing the shareholder, but the organization? Do I have the courage, conscience, and also curiosity, to uphold trust within the boardroom? And do I have that time commitment to dedicate to my role? So I think once you are able to ask yourself these questions and fulfill that you're able to fulfill all 3 points, then yes, you can take up that role.
I hope our listeners are taking his point,
Yes.
because it's not so as glamorous as it may sound or look like.
No, it's certainly not a retirement job, and it comes with a lot of legal responsibilities.
Yeah. The other thing is about organization culture. Yeah? So directors are not involved in day-to-day.
Yes.
But then, to a large extent, the direction of the company also involves how the culture is being set up.
Right.
And I'm sure there's expectation from the directors themselves that the culture has to be positive, etc.
Yes.
But then there's a challenge because they're not involved day to day. So how can they be managing or shaping the culture of an organization?
Yeah, that's so true, because if you look at directors who come in for board meetings just periodically, you wonder how can they actually know? Do they know what's going on the ground? And that's why these conversations have extended. And I think a lot of board directors, which is why I've mentioned there are a lot of things that are happening in the background that we don't see. Increasingly, we see that board spends a lot of time cultivating relationship with the management. And so really the fundamental key about good boards is that you've got to have a good, trusting relationship between board and management. And so you understand and trust that whatever that is being reported up fulfills, your oversight role. The other part is also we see a lot more companies doing a strategy sessions or strategy retreats with the management. I mean, traditionally, I guess it used to be management recommending the strategy, and then the board will rubber stamp it. But encouragingly, I think we see a lot more boards getting involved with the actual strategy session, being part of the strategy session and giving their views and vision of where the company should go, and then the management would support. And when you have those sessions, there's always alignment between board and management. And then one of the ways also we encourage boards to do, board directors to do, is also to have on-site visits, to go down and have more visibility with the C-1, C-2s. Because typically when you look at board meetings, it's typically the CEO that attends, but a lot more companies are bringing their C-1s and C-2s. So there's greater exposure and there's greater alignment. But of course, most importantly, the board of directors have to walk the talk. And they have to reinforce the values that they want to inculcate within the organization.
You mentioned about board building a good relationship with the management. Now, where does the CEO come in? What's the CEO's role in this?
The CEO is absolutely critical to that relationship. The CEO needs to build and inculcate that relationship with the board. The CEO needs to have a good relationship with the chair. So this is a lot of the things that we teach, even in the mandatory program that we run on behalf of Person Malaysia. That's one of the things that we look at is how the good relationship between the chair and the CEO and the board and the CEO is absolutely critical. And the CEO is really the conduit in keeping the board informed of anything that's going on, and also managing expectations with the management team. Even down to the quality of papers that are presented to the board. So the CEO in this particular area is absolutely critical. And this is the role that he or she plays as a conduit between the both of them. And the trust between board and management will really depend on how the CEO will help to build that trust between both parties.
Today, we see the younger CEOs. Do you think they have the right ingredients or years of experience in managing the expectation of the board?
I think one thing I've noticed and picked up is that many of the management has come to ICDM wanting to understand how they can work better with boards, and really that is sort of very enlightening in the sense that, not just board wanting to work better with management, but management actually wants to know what board expectations are so they can deliver better reports, better insights to the board. Now, when it comes to the point about the CEO, I think there are duties from both sides. And this is where the chair comes in and play that very important role. The chair also should serve as a guide to the CEO on the expectations of what he or she expects management to be presenting. So the CEO also should be undertaking development skills or even mentorship and so forth to be able to work with boards better. At the end of the day, if the relationship is good, then approvals or anything, deliberations and so forth will go smoother. And actually one point that I want to make is when you talk about young CEOs, naturally I'm assuming that the industry they're in is also very dynamic. And many times we look at boards, there may be some comments about boards being very risk adverse. And we're also trying to shift that mindset, because as we try to get boards to innovate and even think about innovation, we're also trying to move board directors' mindset from being risk adverse to being a bit more risk aware. It doesn't mean you are neglecting your fiduciary roles and so forth, but it's to have the ability to be able to open up, and to encourage, for management team to innovate, test, and even explore, so that creates a conducive environment for the company to innovate. So it's a little bit of adjustments between both parties, but in the case of what you're asking, the chair also plays a role.
In terms of diversity of board members, what kind of diversity are we looking at? What kind of parameters are we saying here?
The diversity word has really gone from gender diversity to diversity of all sorts. When we did diversity study in 2021, we actually effectively look at 8 parameters. A few of them, namely, are not just gender, but we look at age, skill sets, geographical representation, independence, and industry sectors. So depending on the sector you're in and so forth, different elements of diversity comes into play. And so if you're in the industry or startup industry, you may want somebody from a CEO background, for example, or you may want certain geographical representation depending on your presence in those countries. You may want a younger generation. But what we have noticed in many of the boards today is that they have good age representation, gender, of course, but also skill sets diversity in terms of a combination of legal, accounts, auditing, and then you find people that has a background in AI, human capital, even branding for that matter, for a company that's dealing with, retail, for example.
Talking about skill sets, now AI is a mainstream topic today.
Yes.
Right. Everybody's on the AI bandwagon. To be equipped with what's happening around the world, you would agree with me, the board members should also know what's happening around the space of AI today.
Yes.
What kind of trainings or education that board members should take up in managing this new way of business in AI environment?
Great point. And I think every conversation we have these days, we cannot avoid the subject of AI. So in a study that's done, a corporate director study that was done in 2024 by PwC, respondents, almost 75% of them felt that AI is important. Only 4% of them felt they have the skills to oversee AI in their organization. That is a very low statistic. We have noticed that in the directors that we have worked with in development training and so forth, at the moment there are different maturity levels of understanding of AI. You have the very mature ones who are already have been embarked on some form of transformation, and you have the one that is starting up. And I think really what we're trying to position our development training is to target them accordingly. I think what we don't want to do is to get everybody lost in that whole AI motion, and then everybody has to jump on board and go back and roll out a AI transformation journey. But what we really want to do is tailor the development training accordingly. So we've been working with a national organization on the AI playbook for directors. What we see a lot of trend and requests coming in is in two areas. One is looking at the emerging areas of AI, so them understanding what are the emerging AI developments in their particular sector. The other is AI governance, which is really a very important aspect of it. Even down to stock taking what your organization is using in terms of AI platform. I think all those fundamental basics are important because let's not deny that in a sense that already a lot of organizations have got people and employees working with some form of ChatGPT, but really the board understanding the exposure that they have to potential issues and coming up with a framework to govern that.
So what are the programs specifically that ICDM has today that would get board members to be accelerated into these AI? You mentioned about AI playbook. Is it ready now today, or is it in the pipeline?
It's in progress. We've had good discussions, and I think we've also had engagement sessions with directors, various levels of directors, looking at what is important, what is not. I think the important thing is with the playbook is not making it a completely different exercise, but kind of integrating it to the existing framework of companies. I mean, the programs that we have spans from AI readiness, AI governance, but I think the more popular ones is really companies that are concerned with the risk that they are exposed to. And with many of these issues, we see that you get the board's attention when it's a risk. When we first started talking about sustainability, it was about what are the sustainability risks that is material to you. And so many of the companies are parking AI as that as well to start off with. But when you look at AI and governing AI, I think the other important thing we've found is that I think the responsibility to look into AI issues must sit with a particular committee. And it must appear in an agenda, like any other things where we started with sustainability, people, is to ensure that the agenda is worked on and to ensure that boards are deliberating about it so that it doesn't get lost in transition.
So are you saying it's a board committee on AI specifically, or a management committee
Well,
on AI?
some organizations do have one, but we are also mindful that you cannot keep adding committees. We've got many committees. In some companies, there are already about 5 committees on board. But I think important thing is to recognize which committee it should come under and give it a little bit of airtime so that it can be discussed, particularly from a risk factor and an opportunity.
Coming to the DNA of a director, how do we peel this DNA to give our audience a feel? This is what's required for a person to be a director. Because some of us, we have X number of years in corporate. We assume that we are ready for us to become a director, but we may not be, right? So can you spell out some characteristics that you can see from far, this person is maybe a potential director or not? How do you see that?
I think firstly, perhaps it's your seniority in the sense that you have been in a C-suite position. That's typically one that makes it a lot easier because in the sense that you have already got enough interaction with the board. I think secondly is your understanding of board duties. So your exposure to what the board, typically what a board director needs to look at, whether it's from risk, finance, and all the other critical areas. So knowing those areas would help you in that sense. And I think what we do is we run a board screening exercise for many of the affiliate members, those that are wanting to become board ready. And in this screening, typically we see sometimes there could be a deficiency in terms of understanding the role, so we put them through training. But others could be more of a practical experience or just having that characteristics to be able to question, have that courage to ask the right questions. And that doesn't come from the traditional training. It comes from mentorship. So you see that holistically when we're working with aspiring directors, it's not the fact that you've attended 10 trainings and you're ready to be on board, but also you have that EQ to be able to lead and to be a board member and to sit within the table amongst 8 peers and to have that courage to ask that question. So that comes from the mentorship aspect. And then, of course, I've mentioned visibility with the board and thought process of how you oversee to demonstrate that you are ready to lead and ask the right questions, but and using your executive experience and understanding how you can translate that as in contributing back to as a board member.
We see there are some cases where board members are being sued, happening around the globe, happen in Malaysia as well. So now, do I need to be worried if I become a board member, there is a risk of me being sued? And what are the steps that I need to take so that I don't get into that kind of issues?
Well, as I said, the directorship comes with a legal and fiduciary responsibility. When we guide directors from the onset, we guide them through what it takes to be a director and what their duties and what do they need to do to perform those duties. And I think for any director, as long as they act in the best interest of the company, and whether they challenge or they support a decision, if they can prove that they have acted and considered decisions by acting in the best interest of the company, and of course, most importantly, ensure that it's minuted, I think they do not have to worry about this. And I think the other part of being a director is to ensure that you continuously develop yourself so you know ongoing regulatory requirements, you know what's evolving, you know what the emerging issues are, keep yourself up to date. So as long as you exercise that conscience and that courage and that curiosity to learn more and understand and be prepared, then you will be able to deliver your duty effectively. But of course, what we always remind directors is really if you do not agree to a particular project or decision, you must always remember to voice your dissent and constructively challenge. And that's why minutes are so important in board meetings. And I think the part about asking the right questions is, I think the board directors will only have the ability to be able to ask the right questions, provided that they continuously develop themselves.
You mentioned you have about 1,500 members
Yes.
with ICDM
And growing.
and growing. How do you drive this membership? I mean, where do people see ICDM and how do they go about this?
Well, there's been a lot of referrals to us. A lot of companies have come on board. Our individual members comprise of companies who are already our members, and naturally their board becomes the individual members. But we also get a lot of recommendation and referral from various members as well. We started off with a few hundred members, and in over 7 years, we have built up to 2,200 members. But only 1,005 of them are in the registry, because the remaining are maybe not ready, or they may be in a position where they're not ready to step out on the registry. And actually, 40% of the registry are female candidates as well. Where do we scout them? I think we work with a lot of professional organizations, the likes of ACCA, even Bar Council for that matter, because legal and finance are really the more in-demand potential candidates. But at the same time, I think there's been a lot of awareness about board directorships, and a lot of them wants to get on board. And hence you see that gap of 700 where they're not quite ready, but they're along the journey that perhaps in the next 3-4 years, they will also be the next pipeline. So we're hoping to grow this because the demand of the skill sets have already increased. As I mentioned earlier, is that now we're not just looking at the traditional skill sets. Even for that matter, we've recently worked with the Sharia Association, because a lot of the Sharia committee members are looking at ascending to becoming a board member eventually. So as you can see, the growing demands in terms of skill sets, people management, reputation, and so forth. So I think there is really a lot more opportunities, but board directorship is a journey on its own. It's like a career on its own. So I think a lot of people may have the misconception that if I join, we will eventually get a board seat. But I think there needs to be time invested in it and effort as well.
A lot of jobs are getting disrupted by AI today.
Yes.
Do you see one day the jobs of board of directors will get somehow been taken over by AI in some ways?
I asked ChatGPT that question. It didn't come up with a completely empty boardroom table. It did come up with a very sci-fi sort of people around, but not really an emptyless boardroom table. Actually, we don't see that. I personally don't see that evolving, and simply because I think AI is really developing so quickly. But I think at some point, we have to understand that there needs to be human intervention in certain areas. So there are certain jobs that are really not replaceable. And I think AI certainly cannot replace professional skepticism. And this is one conversation we had when we were talking about audit firms taking up, eventually employing AI. So I think there are processes where you can have AI completely, but there are processes where there needs to be certain degree of human intervention, because professional sound judgment and professional skepticism is still required. I think AI can help boards make better decisions because they can provide the data and insights that board needs at the speed that they need. But I think it certainly cannot replace the judgment that board members display.
Well, let's hope so. The other thing is about coming back to AI. There's an article that I read that board members are a bit nervous because by employing or by deploying AI into their work, board members' work or even management work, it kind of have negative implication to their fiduciary obligations because there's a risk factor for making the wrong judgment based on AI interpretation. Do we see that happening in Malaysia?
I think there are awareness that it can happen. Whether it happens, I've not seen the case. I mean, I've read a case overseas where consulting firms are having issues with, citations that are, based on AI hallucinations. I think there's certainly a lot of awareness, and I think the board understands it, which is why that there has been a growing demand for AI programs that we've run, not just publicly, but also specifically for companies. I'm glad to see that. But I don't think, I think that in Malaysia, we're still quite careful on how we deploy AI. I think there is still a level of judgment and oversight that boards are looking at, before they jump into it, which is why the playbook is very critical and continuous development for us is important. And of course, we've had companies come to us looking for AI specific skills directors. But then what we're noticing now is that I think the reliance is not going to be on that one director, but I think the board realizes that everybody on the boardroom table have to have some degree of AI knowledge to be able to govern effectively and also even approve projects potentially that involves AI.
Right. You earlier mentioned about chairman of the board playing an important role in facilitating the discussion. How do you select a chairman of the board? Is there a separate criteria that we have on top of being a board member?
Yes, I think with many of the boards, the consideration of a chair is even more stringent than a board director. And when we talk about the chair's responsibility, the chair has to make sure that everyone in the room contributes. The chair has to make sure that the dynamics of the room are able to arrive at a decision. The chair has to make sure that there are members that are constructively challenging before they arrive at the decision. The chair has to have a good relationship with the CEO. So a lot of it is not just the technical competence, but it's the characteristics of the chair that is important. So yes, you're right. In many companies, they take a long time and they actually review to make sure the suitability of the culture. So one of the things when we do placements for directors is we're not just picking someone that fulfills the skill sets of the company, but we also make sure that the cultural fit is there. So you may on paper see that there are a lot of, if someone wants to have a director with the digital skill sets, or maybe from the legal background, for example, there may be many candidates that can fulfill that role. But I think a lot of the nomination committees will make sure that the candidate itself has that cultural fit and characteristics which will be able to blend well. At the end of the day, when you're talking about a football team, for example, you don't want superstars around the table, but you want a team that can work together with one another. So yes, to your question is careful consideration is done when the chair is elective, not just by way of the seniority, but also the ability to command the room.
We discussed about board assessment or board evaluation.
Yes.
Can you explain a bit more what evaluation do you take on?
Yes, it's fascinating to me because I think the board evaluation is one of the most important way to be able to find out how effective your board is working with one another. And I think that evaluation process is so robust and so fruitful in the sense that, the outcomes is just something that you can use moving forward. We go to boards where there are work to be done, maybe there are gaps and so forth, but we also go to very good boards. And the idea is that when you do this evaluation, it's not about finding fault, but it is about driving your board from good to great. So the evaluation process really is, if it's done internally, is a set of questionnaires that are distributed to the board as well as the management for feedback. And then the findings are collated and shared with the board at the end of the day. But when you do an independent, it's more meaningful because an external party, not in the form of an audit, but an external party will come and interview one-on-one with each director. And this is where directors can be very candid about their views, where they feel that, can be improved, or maybe there's some positive remarks as well. And in the sense that it gives you an overview of what are the strengths of the board, and what are areas that can be improved. And of course, I mentioned about 360 feedback because the conversation, not only with the directors, are also done with the management. And management, in the sense, I mean the CEO, at times mostly the CFO, at times CSO, CIO, depending on which C-suite has the a lot more interaction with the board. And now we're finding that not just listed companies, but a lot of statutory bodies, even public sector agencies have adopted this evaluation process. So really, it's one of the ways to get insights into how effective the board is working. And just to end is that when we do an evaluation, we evaluate across 10 key parameters. A few of them would be when we evaluate the board leadership, we evaluate the board composition, how effective the board committee is, and of course, something we've spoken about, the board and management relationship. And in some cases, you would see ratings of the board differ from the ratings from management. But this is quite common. I think how you see yourself and how others sees you could be different. But I think what we really want to drive at is that it's not about blaming someone or pointing fingers, but it's about looking at why is there a gap, and really for the board to investigate why the board sees themselves that way and why management would see them otherwise, and to draw that alignment closer. So we've seen boards that have improved over the years when they do the evaluation because they understand one another better.
So when you present these board assessment results,
Yes.
have you encountered tough conversations with board members themselves in being defensive or in being very challenging to the outcome of the assessment?
I think we always try and go in with a very positive note in the sense that I think we stay focused on the subject matter and the issues. There sometimes could have been difficult conversations, but I think at the end of the day, if a board wants to improve and wants to learn and wants to look at potential areas that they can enhance, they should take that step to be a bit more positive. So to your question, yes, there has been some difficult conversations, but thankfully, majority of them, the boards have been very open to receiving feedback, including the chairman. And I think it is all in the exercise of wanting to enhance and going from good to great. So in that spirit of that, I think we were able to convey the messaging in a more positive manner.
What's an average tenure of a board member?
The MCCG, the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance, recommend for independent directors up to 9 years. The listing regulations, 12 years for independent directors. But majority of the company we're working with, we do see them stepping off after 9 years. So that, there is a regular refreshment that is done, and it also gives opportunity for other directors to come on board.
You mentioned about placement. So you place directors in enterprises.
That's right.
Right. What's the trend now where the demand is going for directors?
That's right. No, that's good. We're so proud that since we've been established, we've placed around about 80 directors on boards. And what we're noticing in terms of the sourcing trends is that it's really evolved in a sense because typically on a boardroom table, as we have emerging areas like sustainability, digital, AI, cybersecurity, and so forth, we cannot keep adding one individual skill sets onto the table. And what we're noticing from the trends is that companies are looking for candidates with multi-dimensional skill sets. So if you were from the legal background, a lawyer perhaps, you may have knowledge digitally, or you may have sustainability knowledge. If you were an accountant, you may have maybe knowledge on cybersecurity background, for example, and you happen to be a female. So what really is the trend that we're looking at now is that companies are really looking at people with multi-skill sets because there are only that many seats on the table. And therefore, when we go out and speak to potential pipeline, our registry people and so forth, it's really to continuously upskill yourself. So if you are an accountant, there are many more accountants that are competing with you for the seat. So what would make you stand out to the companies? For now, it's definitely sustainability or maybe even digital knowledge. So that will help you elevate your skill sets and make you a more attractive candidate from the rest of it. But of course, when I mentioned skill sets is not just to an extent of certification, but you have to continuously elevate yourself. And when I speak about visibility, you have to be out there speaking about that particular subject matter via social media or via events and so forth. So I think this whole multi-skill sets dimension is something that potential or aspiring directors can look at equipping themselves, particularly if you're in an area or profession where there are many of you. And so how do you then differentiate yourself from the rest?
So what would be your advice to our potential board members in today's environment, moving to future, talking about more convergence of tech, more convergence of sustainability? The pressure from the shareholders is only ever increasing, it's not going down, right? So what would you say to them?
I think they have to take stock of how much time they can dedicate to the companies. In Bursa, you are allowed to sit on 5 listed boards, but I think it's very important that directors make that call on whether they are able to accommodate all 5 companies and be able to dedicate sufficient time. As you know, board papers are hundreds and hundreds of pages. So unless you can do justice to these companies, I think the very important thing is to make the call whether you are able to dedicate that time to be able to go through the papers, understand the company, understand the business, to be able to offer your oversight. The other aspects that which I'm very passionate about is about lifelong learning. And this is something that even the people at the highest level of the board, the chairman will tell you, good chairmen will say they believe in lifelong learning, because it's not always about knowing everything, but it's really having that humility to learn and unlearn. Because the best boards or leaders is not just to adapt, but they are there to be able to anticipate. So to me, I think leadership at its core is really a lifelong classroom.
Jackie, this has been a very engaging and very insightful session.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for your time, and hope to see you again.
Thank you, Raja. I hope it's been useful for a lot of the members listening in. And I hope this was also inspire them to potentially think about taking on a board directorship journey eventually at some point of time in their career. Thank you.